We awoke up next morning, as if nothing had ever happened. I got dressed into my uniform, and we left to get Toby. Thankfully James was still asleep as we pulled out of the work shed. We pulled into the water tower to top off Toby's water tanks, and as we did we saw Peter Sam gathering some trucks. Just before we could fill up Toby's tanks, Jake yelled that Toby was all good and that we should go. I thought this was strange, but before I could argue with him the signal went green, and we went off. I later found out that Jake overheard Toby chatting with Peter Sam, and what he heard was something concerning. Apparently Peter Sam said the new water they had gotten felt strange and had been a lot weaker than normal. He tried laughing off by saying he hoped he didn't have any troubles, but proceeded to almost cough up a lung. Jake had grown concerned after hearing the EAS alert and didn't want to take any risks. I thought he was being paranoid, but the thought he may have been right lingered in the back of my mind. We picked Henrietta from Elsbridge and traveled up to Tidemouth to begin our first run. At first it went great. We picked up our passengers and traveled up toward Knapford, where we went onto the branch up to Elsbridge. There we exchanged some passengers with Rosie, then traveled down the F4 branch. As we pulled into F4, I jumped from the cab and went to Henrietta to get ready to use her to take us back up the line. However, I noticed Henrietta's controls weren't working, so we weren't able to travel backwards. So that took some time to get Toby and Henrietta flipped around for the return journey. As we waited, Toby grew impatient, saying, "Oh, where is that damn bus? He's going to make me late. The last thing I want is Spencer bickering with me." I had enough teasing from Peter Sam today. Jake and I looked at each other and sighed. For an engine as old as Toby, he still was as feisty as a child. After several more minutes of waiting, Tom Tipper rolled up in his mail van. He told us that he passed by Bertie, who was sitting on the side of the road facing a car laying in a ditch. He noticed a man, he assumed to be his driver, along with several others near the window trying to talk to the man in the car. We continued talking and soon I felt several taps on my shoulder. I turned and saw Jake staring off towards the nearby town. I looked to see a massive crowd of people. It was fucking huge, I tell ya. A nearby workman went to investigate, but just he got close he screamed in utter terror and began to run. The crowd proceeded to chase after him, and it was then when more screams and even several alarms echoed from the town. Before we knew it, the workman tripped and was surrounded by the horde. We were horrified to hear his screams with what could be only described as the splattering of blood. Just as one finished feasting on the man, it looked towards us and let a blood-curdling scream and began coming after us, soon followed by the rest. The people at the platform scrambled into Henrietta. The nearby workmen pounded on the doors begging to be let inside. Tom jumped into the cab and told me to release the brake. I quickly followed and we began to exit the station just as those creatures reached the poor bastards still on the platform. We raced down the branch at speeds we had never gone before. We saw Ben, who was sitting in the shed. He seemed confused, but as he looked behind us his face turned to one of fear. We thundered past, and as we entered the tunnel we heard his screams echo out from behind. We also saw Terrence sitting in a field. We whistled for him to get to safety, but we had already shot past. It was then we heard the frantic honking of a horn, and there we saw Bertie being chased by his own horde of those creatures. There was nothing we could do as he raced towards the horde that had been chasing us. We soon made it to Elsbridge, where we finally had a chance to calm down. Just then a horn echoed in the distance, and then Daisy raced by with Half of her held scared and worried people while the other half shook and rattled. I would tell you what was happening within, but I couldn't tell due to the blood which coated the windows from within. We quickly backed Toby into the goods shed and thankfully there was a truck full of coal and water so we were able to refill Toby's tanks. At the time the fear of us coming off the rails was still fresh in mind. I mean we were lucky traveling down the branch at those speeds. I guess that's what you call foreshadowing.